The 31st of March 1944, Palau. 10 o'clock at night. In the darkness over the western Pacific, two Japanese flying boats lifted from the water and turned toward the Philippines. The flight was supposed to be short, quiet, and secret. From Palau to Davao, across the open ocean, it should have taken only a few hours. But the men aboard those aircraft were not ordinary passengers, and the papers aboard one of them were not ordinary documents. One aircraft carried Admiral Mineichi Koga, Commander-in-Chief of the Imperial Japanese Navy's combined fleet. He was the man who had inherited the highest naval command after the death of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. The other aircraft carried Rear Admiral Shigeru Fukudome, Koga's Chief of Staff, along with officers of the combined fleet staff. With them traveled a set of papers that described Japan's plan for the decisive naval battle it still hoped could stop the American advance across the Pacific. To the Japanese command, this was an evacuation flight. To the Americans, it would become one of the most valuable intelligence accidents of the Pacific War. The official story began with bad weather. A storm front, two aircraft in trouble, one senior admiral dead, another senior officer washed ashore on a hostile island. But the part of the story that mattered most did not die with Koga, and it did not sink with the wreckage. Somewhere off the coast of Cebu, in the Bohol Strait, an oil-covered container drifted toward land. Inside it were wet pages, code-related material, operational studies, naval dispatches, and a red-covered document marked with a single letter: his Z. That letter represented one of Japan's most sensitive operational plans. It was a strategy for bringing the remaining strength of the Imperial Japanese Navy and its land-based air forces against the next major American thrust. It was Japan's blueprint for a decisive battle. And in a war where thousands of men could die because a commander guessed wrong about the enemy's next move, this document gave American intelligence something rare. A glimpse inside the enemy's mind before the battle began. But this is not a story about one piece of paper magically winning a war. Wars are not won that way. The Battle of the Philippine Sea would be decided by radar, fighter direction, pilot training, carrier doctrine, submarine attacks, anti-aircraft fire, logistics, industrial strength, and the judgment of commanders under pressure. But the Z plan mattered because it helped American commanders understand what Japan intended to do, how it hoped to fight, and why the coming battle would not be a random clash at sea, but a deliberate attempt by Japan to throw everything it had left against the U.S. advance. The strange part is that the document was not captured in a raid. It was not stolen by a spy in Tokyo. It was not broken by code breakers in a locked room. It was pulled from the sea by Filipino civilians, hidden from Japanese soldiers, moved through guerrilla networks, carried by former prisoners, sealed inside mortar shells, rushed by submarine, translated in Australia, retranslated in Pearl Harbor, and delivered to American commanders just before one of the largest carrier battles in history. To understand how that happened, we have to go back to the moment when Japan's Pacific perimeter began to break. By early 1944, the Imperial Japanese Navy was no longer the force that had struck Pearl Harbor, swept through Southeast Asia, and stunned the Allied powers in the first months of the war. It still possessed powerful ships, experienced officers, and a tradition of aggressive naval thinking. But the strategic situation had changed. Japan's carrier air groups had been badly worn down. Its pilots were becoming harder to replace. Its shipping lanes were under pressure. Its forward bases were being isolated, bombed, bypassed, or crushed. The United States had taken the offensive and was moving across the Pacific with a speed and weight Japan could not match indefinitely. American power in the Pacific did not move like a single weapon. It moved like a system. Aircraft carriers, submarines, Marines, Army divisions, Seabees, oilers, repair ships, intelligence units, code breakers. Engineers, radar operators, and logistics planners all worked together. Islands that had once looked like remote dots on a map became airfields, anchorages, submarine bases, and stepping stones toward Japan itself. Tarawa, the Marshalls, Truk, the Admiralties, Hollandia, the Marianas, each name represented not only a battle, but a tightening ring. For Japan, the danger was not just the loss of territory, it was the loss of strategic depth. If the United States seized the Marianas, American long-range bombers could eventually threaten the Japanese home islands from bases much closer than before. If the Americans pushed through the Central Pacific and the Southwest Pacific at the same time, Japan's southern resources and its defensive perimeter could be split apart. The empire needed a way to stop the advance before it became irreversible. That hope rested on a familiar Japanese idea, the decisive battle. Japanese naval thinking had long imagined a climactic engagement in which an approaching American fleet would be weakened, drawn forward, and destroyed by concentrated Japanese naval power. In theory, submarines, land-based aircraft, carrier aircraft, surface ships, and battleships could combine to inflict a defeat so severe that the United States would be forced to reconsider the cost of continuing the war. By 1944, the theory was under brutal pressure from reality. But inside the Japanese command structure, the dream of one decisive naval engagement still remained. Admiral Mineichi Koga understood the danger. He had taken command of the combined fleet after Yamamoto's death in April 1943, and from the beginning he believed Japan's chance depended on concentrating its remaining strength at the right moment. The plan that emerged was known as the Z Plan. Its first version dated to August 1943. But by early 1944, the situation had changed so sharply that the plan had to be revised. Japan's outer positions had been battered, and the American fleet was getting closer. Koga wanted to defend what he considered a critical line across the Pacific. The Marianas, Palau, and the approaches toward the Philippines were no longer abstract points on a chart. They were the zone where Japan expected the next great test to come. If that line broke, Japan's remaining strategic options would shrink dramatically. Koga believed he had to meet the American advance there, and he believed he had to do it with maximum force. In February 1944, the United States struck Truk, the great Japanese naval base in the Caroline Islands. For years, Truk had been one of the symbols of Japanese forward power in the Pacific. But American carrier strikes showed that even Truk was no longer safe. Japanese ships were sunk, aircraft were destroyed. The message was clear: no base was beyond reach forever. Koga left for Palau, where he continued shaping the plan for the coming battle. At Palau, the combined fleet staff refined the strategy. On the 8th of March, 1944, the final draft was issued as Secret Combined Fleet Operations Order Number 73. It was signed from the battleship Musashi, one of the largest and most powerful battleships ever built. The irony was hard to miss. A battle plan for the future was being issued from a ship that represented an older vision of naval power. Huge guns, thick armor, and decisive surface action. But by 1944, the Pacific War had become a war of aircraft, submarines, scouting, radio intelligence, radar screens, and miles of ocean. The Z Plan was detailed. It dealt with how Japan intended to respond to Allied attacks against its South Pacific positions. It included plans to concentrate naval and air power, to use land-based aircraft as a major striking force, and to defend vital areas against the next American thrust. It was not simply a general statement of intent. It was an operational framework showing how the combined fleet expected to fight. Koga's headquarters at Palau was not safe for long. At the end of March, American carrier aircraft struck the Palau area. Japanese scouts had already warned that a powerful American force was approaching. Koga moved his command ashore, and his flagship, Musashi, left harbor. The battleship was torpedoed shortly after leaving, though the damage was not fatal. Still, the incident added to the sense that Palau had become too dangerous as a headquarters. Koga and Fukudome concluded that the Americans might be moving against the Western Carolines or Western New Guinea. Koga decided to withdraw to Davao on Mindanao, where he could continue directing operations. So, on the night of March 31, 2 aircraft prepared to leave. There was a third aircraft as well, delayed until the early hours of April 1. It carried communications and clerical staff with highly sensitive codes. That third plane would reach Davao. The other two would not. Koga's aircraft disappeared into a tropical storm and crashed into the Pacific. There were no survivors. The commander-in-chief of the combined fleet was gone. Fukudome's aircraft tried to avoid the same fate. The crew attempted to skirt the storm, but the weather and fuel situation became desperate. Davao was no longer reachable. Manila was considered, but headwinds and fuel consumption made that impossible as well. Cebu lay ahead. The pilot attempted to bring the aircraft down near the coast, but the approach went wrong. The flying boat slammed into the water in the Bohol Strait, about 2.5 miles from shore. It was around 2:30 in the morning. The impact tore the aircraft apart. Fuel spread over the water and ignited. Men struggled in darkness, fire, oil, wreckage, and open sea. Fukudome was injured, but he freed himself and grabbed a floating cushion. Around him, other survivors fought to stay alive. 12 men survived. 12 others did not. In that moment, Fukudome believed the documents had gone down with the aircraft. His first concern was survival. The briefcase, the red-covered plan, the code rules, the operational papers, all of it seemed lost beneath the water. But the container did not sink. At daylight, Filipino civilians on the coast of Cebu saw Japanese survivors coming toward shore. Some of the survivors were rescued, captured, and moved inland by local Filipinos and guerrillas. Fukudome himself was seized after reaching shore. He became, in a deeply humiliating moment for the Imperial Japanese Navy, a captured flag-rank officer. The Japanese garrison nearby quickly learned that an aircraft had crashed and that senior naval personnel were involved. They launched searches for survivors and for documents. That detail matters. The Japanese were not only trying to recover men, they were trying to recover papers. They knew what might have been aboard. On April 3, 2 Filipino men, Pedro Gantuangoko and Opoy Weimer, noticed an object floating near the beach at Paralos, south of Magtalisay. It was oily, slimy, and easy to overlook as wreckage. Weimer took a boat out to retrieve it. When he opened the box, he found a red leather portfolio and packets of wet documents. He could not read the Japanese military material, but he understood something important. These papers had value. That was a dangerous understanding. Japanese troops were already searching the area. If they found the box, it would vanish back into Japanese hands. If they discovered that local civilians had hidden it, the consequences could be deadly. The 2 men waited, moved cautiously, dried the documents on bamboo flooring, and eventually buried the box. In a war of fleets and carriers, this was the hidden hinge of the story. 2 civilians on a beach, handling wet papers that senior admirals did not yet know had survived. The documents passed into the hands of the guerrillas. In Cebu, the American guerrilla commander Lieutenant Colonel James M. Cushing was already dealing with a nearly impossible situation. His forces were small. Japanese pressure was intense. Civilians were vulnerable, and now he had both Japanese prisoners and Japanese documents that might be of enormous value. Cushing's position was morally and militarily brutal. Holding Fukudome and the other Japanese survivors made his guerrillas a target. Japanese forces moved through the area, killing civilians, burning villages, and searching for the missing men and materials. Cushing knew that the prisoners could be valuable to Allied intelligence, but he also knew that his small force could not shield the local population from reprisals forever. Messages to higher headquarters moved slowly through the guerrilla communication network. Orders did not arrive in time. The pressure mounted. Cushing eventually made a decision that could easily have ruined him in the eyes of distant commanders who did not see what he saw. He agreed to return the Japanese prisoners in exchange for assurances that civilians would be spared. Fukudome and the other survivors were sent back to Japanese lines, but the documents were not returned. They had already moved beyond Japan's immediate reach. This was the paradox of the whole episode. Japan recovered the admiral. It did not recover the plan. Cushing later focused on getting the documents out. He understood that their appearance alone suggested importance. The red portfolio, seals, operational maps, and official format all pointed to high-level material. To protect the papers from moisture and damage, they were rolled tightly and placed inside empty mortar shells. Then they were handed to couriers, including former American prisoners of war, and moved across dangerous terrain toward Negros, where they could be picked up and sent to Allied intelligence. Meanwhile, the Japanese kept searching. They offered a large reward, they dropped warnings, they pressed the guerrillas and civilians. Their behavior told Allied intelligence something even before the translations were complete. Japan desperately wanted those papers back. In intelligence work, the enemy's reaction is itself a clue. At Southwest Pacific Area Headquarters, officers began connecting the dots. Koga was dead. A high-ranking Japanese officer had survived a crash near Cebu. Guerrillas reported important documents. Japanese forces were searching aggressively. The documents might be more than routine papers. They might be something extraordinary. The nearest submarine available for a special pickup was USS Crevalle. The Crevalle's mission was layered in secrecy. Publicly, or at least outwardly, the operation could be tied to the evacuation of American civilians from Negros. In reality, the documents were a major reason for the pickup. On the 11th of May 1944, Crevalle surfaced near Basay, Negros, as boats came out from shore. The submarine expected about 25 passengers. Instead, it was told there were 41 American civilians, including women and children, as well as important documents. The submarine commander, Lieutenant Commander Francis D. Walker, Jr., accepted them. The documents came aboard in a small wooden box. Inside the submarine, the situation was crowded and tense. Civilians, children, crewmen, and secret papers were now sealed inside a warship operating in Japanese-controlled waters. The Crevalle had to get them out. During the journey south, Japanese aircraft and ships attacked. The submarine was forced to dive repeatedly. Depth charges damaged equipment. The boat survived, but the escape was not clean or easy. It was another reminder that intelligence does not become useful the moment it is captured. It must be moved, protected, delivered, interpreted, and acted upon before time runs out. By May 19, the documents had reached Australia. They were rushed by courier to Brisbane. When American intelligence officers opened the box and spread out the papers, they realized almost immediately that they had something sensitive. The documents were in plain language rather than code, which made them readable once translated. The markings, seals, red covers, and official structure showed they were not low-level field papers. The material went to the Allied Translation and Interpreter Section, known as ATIS, at Indooroopilly near Brisbane. There, translators began working at the highest priority. They identified one document as a copy of Secret Combined Fleet Operations Order No. 73, issued from Musashi at Palau on March 8, 1944, and signed by Admiral Koga. This was the Z-Plan. For the translators, the work was urgent and difficult. The document contained naval terms, operational concepts, place name abbreviations, and Japanese terminology that did not always translate neatly into English. Some of the translators were working under extreme time pressure with material that Army linguists might not fully understand in a naval context. Every phrase mattered. A mistranslated place name, a misunderstood operational term, or a missed nuance could distort the enemy's intended movements. On May 23, ATIS issued a limited distribution translation titled Z Operation Orders. It was 22 pages long. Copies went to senior American leaders, including General Douglas MacArthur and General George C. Marshall. Additional related material, including a study of decisive air operations in the Central Pacific, was translated shortly afterward. At first, even senior officers were not completely sure what the captured material meant in practical terms. It clearly revealed high-level Japanese strategy, but strategy must be connected to timing, geography, enemy capability, and current operations. One officer who immediately grasped its importance was Captain Arthur McCollum, the 7th Fleet Intelligence Officer and Navy Liaison. He realized that Admiral Chester Nimitz in Pearl Harbor needed to see the translations quickly. The documents were flown from Australia toward Pearl Harbor, a journey of thousands of miles. At Pearl Harbor, they came to Captain Edwin T. Layton, Nimitz's fleet intelligence officer. Layton understood both the value and the danger. The ATIS translation was extremely useful, but naval terminology required care. If the documents were going to influence the coming Marianas operation, they had to be as accurate as possible. Layton requested photostats of the original Japanese documents, and JICPOA translators at Pearl Harbor retranslated the Z-plan. The conclusion was clear enough. Japan intended to concentrate its remaining sea and air strength against the next American advance into the island defense system. By now, the clock was running. American forces were preparing Operation Forager, the invasion of the Marianas. Saipan, Tinian, and Guam were not merely islands, they were strategic keys. From the Marianas, the United States could build airfields that would place Japan under direct threat from long-range bombers. For Japan, losing the Marianas meant that the inner defensive perimeter was cracking. For the United States, taking them meant the war could move into a new phase. The Japanese command had changed since Koga's death. Admiral Soemu Toyoda became commander-in-chief of the combined fleet and modified Koga's plan into what became known as AGO. But the basic strategic logic remained. Concentrate naval and land-based air power, use bases in the Marianas and surrounding islands, and strike the American fleet hard enough to stop or cripple the invasion. The Americans now understood the outline of that intention. Copies of Layton's translation and Nimitz's instructions were sent to the commanders associated with the Marianas operation. A flying boat carried copies to Eniwetok, reaching Admiral Raymond Spruance aboard USS Indianapolis on June 8th. Other copies were airdropped to Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher's flagship USS Lexington, while Task Force 58 was already at sea. By the time the American fleet turned toward the Marianas and the Philippine Sea, its senior commanders had a clearer understanding of how Japan intended to fight. This did not mean the Americans knew everything. It did not mean the battle was predetermined. It did not remove uncertainty from the ocean. Intelligence rarely does. What it gave them was a framework. They could see that Japan wanted to bring its maximum remaining force to bear. They could see the importance of land-based airfields. They could see why a westward chase might expose the American fleet to shuttle attacks and land-based aircraft. And they could see that the invasion force at Saipan had to remain protected. That last point became critical. Admiral Spruance has sometimes been criticized for not pursuing the Japanese fleet more aggressively at the opening of the battle. But his primary responsibility was not to satisfy a tactical instinct for pursuit. His responsibility was to protect the invasion of Saipan. The Japanese wanted to draw American carrier forces away, multiply the effect of their aircraft through island bases, and strike the vulnerable amphibious operation. Spruance chose caution, but it was not passive caution. It was disciplined strategic defense. He waited for the Japanese to come into the zone where American fighter direction, radar, anti-aircraft fire, and carrier aircraft could do their work. On the 15th of June 1944, American forces landed on Saipan. 4 days later, on June 19, the Battle of the Philippine Sea began. It became the largest carrier battle of the Second World War. The Japanese plan depended heavily on aircraft. Their carrier force under Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa was weaker than the American carrier force, but Japan hoped to use land-based aircraft from Guam, Rota, Tinian, Yap, and other bases to offset the difference. The concept was dangerous in theory. Japanese aircraft could attack the American fleet, land at island bases, refuel, rearm, and attack again. If the timing worked, the American carriers might face waves from multiple directions while protecting the invasion beaches. But by June 1944, the United States Navy had built a defensive system that Japan struggled to penetrate. American radar detected incoming raids at long range. Fighter direction officers guided F-6F Hellcats toward the attackers. Combat air patrols intercepted Japanese formations before they reached the carriers. Anti-aircraft guns and radar-controlled defenses waited behind the fighters. The American pilots were better trained than many of the Japanese aviators now being sent into battle. The Japanese had brave men in the air. But bravery could not make up for losses in experience, coordination, and aircraft quality. The first day of the battle became known as the Marianas Turkey Shoot. Wave after wave of Japanese aircraft came in. Wave after wave was broken. Some were shot down far from the fleet. Others were destroyed by shipboard anti-aircraft fire. Many never reached their targets. To men watching from American decks, the sky filled with vapor trails, bursts, falling aircraft, and the distant geometry of a modern carrier battle. It was not a duel between two ships. It was a battle fought across hundreds of miles by machines, radios, radar scopes, and men making decisions in seconds. The Japanese also suffered devastating losses at sea. Submarines played a decisive role. USS Albacore torpedoed and sank the carrier Taiho. USS Crevalle torpedoed and sank the carrier Shokaku. These were not minor ships. They were central pieces of Japan's remaining carrier strength. The next day, as the Japanese fleet retreated, American carrier aircraft launched a long-range strike that sank the carrier Hio and damaged other ships. The attack stretched American aircraft to the edge of darkness and fuel limits, leading to dramatic night recoveries as pilots returned to carriers with empty tanks, damaged planes, and almost no margin for error. By the end of the Battle of the Philippine Sea, Japan had lost hundreds of aircraft and many of the trained aircrew it could not replace. The Imperial Japanese Navy's carrier air arm was broken as a strategic instrument. The ships themselves still existed in some cases, but carriers without experienced air groups are floating steel without the striking power that makes them matter. Japan would continue fighting with ferocity. The war was not over. But after the Philippine Sea, Japan could no longer conduct large-scale carrier warfare in the way it had once hoped. The Marianas were now effectively open to American conquest. Saipan would fall after bitter fighting. Guam and Tinian would follow. Airfields would be built. The road toward Japan would shorten. And behind that enormous shift in the war stood a strange chain of events that began with a storm, a crash, and a box floating toward Cebu. The Z plan did not sink the Japanese carriers. American submarines did that. It did not shoot down the Japanese aircraft. American pilots, fighter directors, radar operators, and gunners did that. It did not land Marines on Saipan. Amphibious forces did that. It did not build the fleet that overwhelmed Japan. American industry and logistics did that. But the Z plan gave American commanders something commanders always want and rarely receive in time: insight into the enemy's intended method of battle. That insight mattered. It told them that Japan was not merely reacting. Japan was preparing a concentrated strike. It showed the importance of shore-based air. It reinforced Spruance's decision to protect the beachhead rather than chase too far west. It helped intelligence officers connect Japanese movements to a larger operational concept. And it allowed American leaders to enter the decisive carrier battle of June 1944 with a clearer picture of what the enemy hoped to achieve. There is another part of this story that deserves attention. It was not only an American intelligence victory in the formal sense. It was a Filipino civilian and guerrilla achievement as well. Without Pedro Gantuangoko and Opoy Wamer recognizing the value of the oil-soaked box, the documents might have been destroyed, ignored, or recovered by Japan. Without the guerrilla network on Cebu, the documents might never have reached Cushing. Without Cushing's judgment under pressure, the papers might not have survived the Japanese search. Without the couriers who carried them through dangerous territory, they might never have reached Negros. Without the Crevalle's dangerous pickup, they might never have reached Brisbane in time. Without the translators at ATIS and Jikpoa, the papers would have remained unreadable symbols on wet Japanese pages. This was intelligence as a chain. Every link mattered. There is also a moral complexity here that should not be erased. Cushing returned Fukudome, and the surviving Japanese prisoners because civilians were being killed and villages were being burned. From a distance, that decision might look like a lost opportunity. Up close, it was a choice made under pressure, with innocent lives at immediate risk. The documents survived because Cushing could separate what had to be saved from what could no longer be held. He gave up the prisoners, but he kept the intelligence moving. For Japan, the loss was not only operational, it was symbolic. The combined fleet had already lost Yamamoto in 1943, when American code-breaking allowed U.S. fighters to intercept his aircraft over Bougainville. Now, less than a year later, Koga was dead in another aircraft disaster, and the plan associated with his decisive battle strategy had fallen into enemy hands. The Imperial Japanese Navy's senior command had suffered not only battlefield defeats, but intelligence disasters and command shocks at the highest levels. Yet the Japanese still fought. Toyota modified the plan, Ozawa sailed, pilots climbed into cockpits, ships moved into the Philippine Sea. The decisive battle Japan wanted did come, but not in the form Japan needed. Instead of breaking the American advance, it broke the remaining strength of Japanese carrier aviation. In the archives, the Z-Plan story can appear almost too neat. Document lost, document found, document translated. Battle won. But history was messier. The Americans still had to interpret the intelligence correctly. They still had to move faster than the enemy. They still had to decide what to do with the information. They still had to fight the battle. That is what makes the story powerful. The document did not replace combat. It shaped preparation. It did not remove danger. It reduced uncertainty. It did not guarantee victory. It helped commanders avoid walking blindly into the kind of trap Japan hoped to set. In war, that can be enough to matter. Consider the path of those pages. They began as a secret order inside the command structure of the Imperial Japanese Navy. They left Palau in a flying boat during a night evacuation. They survived a crash that killed half the men aboard. They floated through fuel and seawater. They were recovered by civilians who did not know exactly what they had found, but understood that it was important. They were dried on a bamboo floor, buried, handed to guerrillas, protected during Japanese searches, sealed inside mortar shells, carried across islands, loaded onto a submarine filled with evacuees, depth-charged, delivered to Australia, copied by translators, flown to Pearl Harbor, retranslated, and rushed to commanders at sea. By the time American fighters rose over the Philippine Sea on June 19, the plan that Japan had tried to hide had already crossed the ocean inside the American command system. That is the hidden architecture of victory. A battle is remembered by its explosions, its aircraft, its sinking ships, and its casualty lists. But behind the visible battle there is often another battlefield. The battlefield of information. Who sees first? Who understands first? Who moves the right knowledge to the right commander before the window closes? Who protects the messenger? Who translates the captured page? Who recognizes that a wet, oil-covered box on a beach is not debris, but history? The Z-Plan reminds us that wars are shaped by moments that do not look decisive when they happen. A fisherman pushing a boat into the water. A guerrilla courier carrying documents through jungle. A submarine commander making room for civilians in a wooden box. A translator working through the night over enemy terminology. An intelligence officer deciding that a commander at Pearl Harbor must see the material immediately. A fleet commander reading the enemy's plan and choosing not to be drawn away from his mission. These moments do not always appear on the front page, but they can decide what happens when the fleets meet. After the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the United States continued the drive across the Pacific. The Marianas became American bases. The Japanese carrier force never recovered its lost air strength. The war would continue through Leyte Gulf, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, firebombing, submarine blockade, and finally the atomic bombings and surrender. But in June 1944, a major strategic door opened, and Japan's attempt to slam it shut failed. The Z-Plan was one of the keys that helped the United States understand the door. In February 1945, the story began to emerge publicly. Inside intelligence circles, the captured plan was recognized as one of the most important documents taken in the Southwest Pacific area. Historians still caution that its exact impact on the Battle of the Philippine Sea cannot be measured with mathematical certainty. That caution is important. Good history does not turn useful intelligence into myth, but the same record makes clear that the exploitation of the Z Plan was one of the great intelligence achievements of the Pacific War. And perhaps the most striking part is how fragile it all was. If the box had sunk, there would be no Z-Plan story. If Japanese soldiers had searched the boat at Paros, the documents would have returned to Japan. If the papers had rotted before they dried, the plan might have been unreadable. If Cushing's couriers had been captured, the documents might have disappeared in the hills. If Crevalle had been sunk, the papers and evacuees might never have reached Australia. If the translation had taken weeks instead of days, the intelligence might have arrived too late. If Spruance had ignored the implications, the battle might have developed differently. History often turns on great forces: industry, geography, manpower, technology, ideology. But sometimes those forces pass through a narrow opening created by ordinary human decisions. Two Filipino civilians decided not to hand over a box. A guerrilla commander decided to save the documents even while releasing the prisoners. A submarine commander accepted a dangerous load. A translator worked fast enough to make intelligence useful before it expired. And an American fleet entered one of the largest carrier battles in history with a clearer sense of the enemy's intentions than Japan realized. That is why the Z Plan still matters. Not because it won the Pacific War by itself. It did not. Not because it made the Battle of the Philippine Sea easy. It was not. But because it shows how a modern war is won by systems of courage and information as much as by weapons. The enemy feared not only American carriers, but the vast machine behind them: the scouts, the submarines, the radio operators, the repair crews, the code breakers, the translators, the guerrillas, the commanders, and the civilians who understood that even a wet page could become a weapon. In the end, Japan's secret strategy was not captured in a grand raid. It drifted ashore. And by the time the Imperial Japanese Navy came looking for its decisive battle, the United States had already read part of the script. If you want more forgotten war stories, declassified files, and hidden moments that shaped history, subscribe to Declassified War Stories and turn on notifications, because some of the most important battles were never told on the front page.